This is a video about trees, and I'm going to be upfront with a caveat to say that I am not an expert on trees. This is really purely about just observations that I've made from my own garden, a little bit of field studies years ago, but at a very minor level. So if anyone has any sort of scientific links and things to pop in the comments, that actually shed more light and give a better view, I really welcome that. I'm very keen to learn more and to see sort of real sort of evidence-based science. So in a nutshell, any tree, any plant in the ground is better than none. So we are, I think, heading in the right direction by trying to increase the biodiversity and the trying to increase habitat and plants that will draw down carbon eventually. But one thing I've noticed is that allowing an area to kind of scrub up, as this area my garden has done, so just basically giving it back to nature, we seem to end up with far more resilient trees, and the trees that come in are the classics, the alders, the sycamores. We don't have any, we have cherries that have come in, and that's obviously part and parcel of where we are here. And there's birds and so on, sort of seed dispersion methods that are happening. But those trees, if I were to try and clear this area, I would have a really hard time. If you imagine trying to sort of cut your way through and dig your way through, they're really well established, and in a very, very short period of time, they're very, very resilient. They've got, root system that is well connected, and they found the water. They're really well established, which is a bit of a problem for humans, I grant you. I mean, we're going to struggle to do anything about this fence here, for instance, and it's quite close to this shed. Well, it's very close to this shed, in fact, but in some ways nature really needs it more than we do. So and it probably makes the fence a bit redundant anyway, because nothing's getting through there apart from some animals and so on. But my point here is that trees that are established in this way seem to grow very healthy very quickly, and all the time that this process is going on, there are plants in the soil. So already you've got plants in lots of layers, very, very densely sort of covering the ground, which is a really important point here, and there's a few things about that. One of the things about it is that those plants are photosynthesizing. They are pulling down carbon dioxide the whole time this process is going on. There's no bare earth, and they are doing the work in all those layers, not just the tree, but all the plants around them. They're providing valuable cover for animals. They're providing a habitat potentially and sources of food. There's plants in there that the bees would and do visit. There's lots of places for beetles and so on and so forth. And I suspect this is the corridor that our hedgehogs come through on. So it's providing shelter, it's providing habitat, it's providing food, and it's a really rich area for wildlife, irrespective of what it's actually doing for those trees that we're growing. The other thing about it is that plants in the soil, from just looking at what happens when you dig the soil up, that soil is holding water much, much better. So those trees, I have never watered them. I've never had to do anything to look after them. I've not had to pay for them. they have taken care of themselves and, you know, grown of their own accord without any help from me. Now, when you compare that to the trees that we've planted, so those will have been grown in pots, so, and then taken out of those pots, a hole dug in the ground in a sort of bare patch, and you know, their roots have to take sort of 2 years or so to establish, and all the time I'm having to water them. You know, the area around them is clear of any other plants, and you know, you have to sort of put stakes in to support them, to support the roots if there's wind and so on. There's an awful lot of care that's needed. Not so much in my garden, but elsewhere they'd need protection from animals getting to them, whereas you can see it would be quite difficult for deer and so on to get at these trees that are growing in here. There's some pretty hairy, thorny plants in there that will save them from too much interference. But having said that, these are going to be all a lot of young trees, and actually it's going to take a while before they're doing much in terms of really helping us to reduce carbon dioxide levels. The trees need to be much older, as I understand it. And there seems to me to be a bit of a problem, because we've got these really old trees that have been left and protected, and then we've got this whole period where we seem to have cleared huge numbers of trees, and so we haven't so much got those generations of trees, and at every stage they're doing different things for the wildlife around them. So when you get to those big old oak trees, they're supporting huge numbers of different species for various functions, whether that's food, probably mostly food and shelter and so on. So probably the most important point is, surely it makes most sense to leave those trees in the ground and to look after them as best we can, and to also make sure that we've got those other generations coming through, that we're not just protecting the really, really old trees, we're protecting the next generations in between as well. So in a kind of hierarchy, I would say looking after our ancient woodlands is a top priority, followed by allowing these areas to sort of scrub up and the trees to grow as nature does, far better, I think, than we can. And then finally, the expensive and intensive option, which is to plant trees, and it has to be the right tree in the right place. You know, some habitats are like peat habitats and so on, are much better being kept as peat habitats, not turned over to forest. So but yes, if we're going to plant trees, we'd have to be aware, and this is really where there's a problem with guerrilla planting, but also with developers who are promising to increase biodiversity and planting these great plantations and things, but actually they need a plan for aftercare, and it's going to involve a lot of water and a lot of looking after, and probably not all those trees that get planted, I don't know how many of them will make it through to sort of adult trees, but I suspect it's a not great percentage, depending on how well they're looked after from the point at which they're planted. So that's my my penny's worth. Please, I welcome contrary views and backed with science, and people to tell me that I'm wrong. But equally, I'd be very happy to see any evidence, and sort of guidance that supports really how we should be doing this in a way that achieves the results that we're wanting. And to me, it's a no-brainer, because letting nature do it is really cheap and easy.